Good evening and welcome to the little apartment on the prairie. It'll probably be sometime in the daytime when I upload this video, but right now it's a little bit after 8 o'clock in the evening, and that's why the lighting's really bad in my apartment, but that's okay. There's not going to be much to see. You can just listen. I'm basically going to tell you a story. So you know how sometimes just things, certain ideas, or I don't know, things will come into your life at a certain time and you're like, see how these things connect, and I'm probably not making any sense. So let me try and explain. I recently came across this song that was based on some writings by Julian of Norwich. And if you don't know who Julian of Norwich is, I'm sure lots of people don't, and I didn't know much about her either until recently. I had the idea she was a nun that lived somewhere back in medieval times. That's what I knew. So if you're Catholic, maybe you've heard of her, but maybe you've heard of her anyway. But I came across this song that was really cool, and I'll put a link to it down in the description if you want to listen to it. But the refrain of it goes, "All will be well, all will be well, all manner of things will be well." And I came across that song the night that I found out that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died. And so the song was really comforting to me in a stressful time. All right, so then a couple days ago, I came across something by a nun talking about how Julian of Norwich lived during a great pandemic. And I had never made that connection before, but she lived during the time that the bubonic plague, the Black Death, was really just rolling into England. She would have been a child then. She was born in 1342 and is believed to have died in 1416. The date's not certain, but anyway. So she would have been a child, depending upon where exactly in England she lived, and we don't know that. We don't know much about her at all. But she would have been 4, 5, 6 years old during the time that the plague was really hitting Europe. And so she's someone who lived through a great pandemic, and she knows a lot about isolation, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. We know very little about her life, especially, where she came from, how she grew up. We don't know about her parents. We don't know if, she had family members who died from the plague. There's a good chance she did, because, 60% of Europe died or something, and at least some parts of Europe. Anyway, she might have been a nun, but we don't know that. Some people think she may have been a Benedictine nun, but we don't know that she was. We do know that she could read and write, and that not a lot of people could read and write back then, and especially women, but even most men, couldn't read and write. But nuns and priests often knew how to read and write because they were, you would have learned it in the convent as a nun, maybe. And so maybe she was a nun. But what we know about her is that she became an anchorite. Now, for those who don't know what an anchorite is, some people use the word anchoress. It was a religious person who was sort of like a cloistered nun or a cloistered monk, but taken really to the extreme, or sort of like a hermit. Basically, they were walled into this room that they called a cell. Some cells actually had 2 rooms, and some were bigger than you would typically think of as a cell, like a prison cell. But, like nuns today in convents and monasteries, they refer to their rooms as cells. Anyway, the cell would be attached to a church, and it would be a room built so it was attached to the church. And on one side of the room, there'd be a little window that would look into the chapel so that the anchorite could watch the Mass. And on the other side, like facing the outside, there would be a window with some sort of like a grill or bars over it or something, where people could come and talk to the anchorite, because these were considered very spiritual people. Religion was super important in this time. And so these were kind of like the elite religious. They would be like the pro athletes if you compared sports to religion back then. Okay, so people from the community could come and ask for a blessing or a prayer or ask for advice through this window. So the anchorite was kind of shut off from the rest of the world, but they got to talk to people through the window with the grill. You know, they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have YouTube, they didn't have telephones, but they got to talk to people through there. But they were very isolated. And this was something that people chose to do. It wasn't, you weren't like walled in as a punishment. You weren't in prison. This was something people chose to do. They wanted to devote their life to prayer and contemplating God. And obviously it's not a vocation that would be suitable for all people. And so there was a kind of rigorous process that you had to go through, and the bishop had to approve you becoming an anchorite. Some of the anchorites, most of them were women, but not all of them. Some were men. And some of them were nuns or monks, but you didn't have to be. You could be just a lay person and decide you wanted to be an anchorite, but you had to go to the bishop and talk about why you wanted to be an anchorite and convince him that, you know, you were prepared to do it and you wanted to do it for the right reasons and all of that. And then what they did was they built part of this cell or room, and then you went into the cell, and they gave you last rites, and they basically had a funeral for you, and people could come and attend. It was like your funeral, because you were dying to the world, or you were dying so you could be reborn, and it was kind of like being buried alive. And so then while everybody was like celebrating your funeral, they bricked up the rest of the cell and you were walled in. Now, some of these cells actually had like a door that you weren't allowed to go out, but there would be like a servant that could go in and out to bring you food and empty your chamber pot and whatever, take care of your, you know, your needs that you couldn't do yourself. But in some of them, there was just more like a window opening where people could pass you food and stuff, and I guess you would pass your chamber pot out. So some of them had, you know, there actually was a door. You weren't completely bricked in, but you never went out that door. You know, you stayed there. Now, Julian of Norwich, the church that she was an anchorite at was St. Julian's in Norwich. And her name is most likely not Julian. She just was known as Julian of Norwich because she was the anchorite at St. Julian. So we don't even know what her real name was. You know, nuns today and monks, they take a new name when they take their vows and join the convent or the monastery. And so I guess that's kind of what she did. She took this name of Julian of Norwich, and we don't even know what her birth name was. And she was the anchorite at St. Julian's, but she herself is not a saint. She was never canonized as a saint. So you wonder, why would somebody be an anchorite? Well, I don't even know how to explain that. I mean, you want to give your life for something bigger than you. You want, you know, you believe that your prayers and also your suffering is going to be for the benefit of all mankind. And I mean, that's kind of like what nuns do today, especially cloistered nuns, but not only cloistered nuns, other nuns too. I'm looking at some notes here, so I make sure I don't forget anything that I really wanted to to share. One really interesting thing that I came across is that anchorites were allowed to have a cat in their cell. The cat, at first I thought, well, that's really interesting to let him have a pet. Well, the cat wasn't there to be a pet. The cat was there because back in this time you had a problem with rats. And in fact, during the time of Julian of Norwich, during the bubonic plague, the fleas on the rats were giving people the plague. And so the fact that they had cats probably, helped keep them safe. And Julian apparently was really fond of her cat. I don't know the name of her cat. I don't know if anybody knows the name of her cat, but there are like drawings and paintings of her that, she's pictured with her cat because she really loved her cat. And I guess you would if you're pretty isolated like that. So if you're wondering what did you do all day if you were an anchorite, they prayed a lot, obviously. There are some manuscripts, some instruction, like instruction books for anchorites that have survived. And one thing we know is that they tended to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, which a lot of nuns and monks do today. There are I think it's 7 times a day that they pray. You pray first thing in the morning, you pray at various points throughout the day, up until right before you go to bed. And there are set prayers for each of these times. So they did that, but there were also actually specific things that you're supposed to pray almost all day. There was a prayer you're supposed to say as soon as you woke up, and a prayer you were supposed to say while you were getting dressed, and just these prayers that you said all day long. And then there were times, that there weren't specific prayers you were supposed to recite, but that you could just pray. Some of the anchorites probably read and wrote while they were in their cells, but some of them, especially women, a lot of them were women, and not all women back then knew how to read and write, so that wouldn't have been an option for everyone. Now, of course, they basically attended Mass every day by watching it through the little window in the side of their cell. And then they would have had times that they would have talked with or prayed with or offered blessings for people from the community who came to visit them through the grill, through the other window on the other side of the cell. And it's quite possible that some of them, especially the women, did some sort of charity work as well. Maybe they did sewing or mending for poor people. Geez, Whiskers. And things like that. Okay, I got distracted there by noises outside. Anyway, so they had a structure to their day, which I think for those of us who are, being quarantined or just stuck at home a lot right now, that's really helpful to have a structure to the day. And they did things that there was something practical that you did, like sewing, as well as praying, which is, not that praying is not practical, but I don't know, physical manual labor, I guess is what I'm trying to say, which is what nuns, contemplative nuns today do in a lot of convents. They, they spend lots of time in prayer, but then they also spend time, maybe they raise goats and they make goat cheese that they sell to help support themselves or whatever. There's some manual labor, there's physical work that they do. And so that was part of the kind of the daily routine. And I don't know, I find this fascinating for so many reasons. As many of you know, I am not Christian. I was just telling a friend when I was talking to her about this earlier today that, I could like totally be a nun or enjoy being a nun, I think, if you didn't have to be Catholic. I don't know if that makes sense to you all, but you know, I'm not Catholic. I'm not Christian. But there are a lot of things that really appeal to me about that type of life, the simplicity and the, I don't know, the serenity, anyway. I did a video a while back where I talked a little bit about my own daily spiritual practice. Whiskers, get your butt out of my face. But this was just interesting to me. It kind of gave me some interesting ideas and some insight and a lot of things to think about. And so I just thought I'd share it with you all. Isaac, you bring me your Kong. I'll give you a treat. Yes, come here. Anyway, I guess that's all for today. I just thought I'd kind of share this with you. Let me know what you think about all of this. Let me know kind of how you're finding meaning in this time of this pandemic and being quarantined, if you are being quarantined or isolating or whatever. And I don't know, just share your thoughts. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Be safe. Be well.